What is up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Preview. I am one-third of the triumphant trio. I'm Jeff Hartman, joined by Bryan Davis and Dave Schofield. Bryan, what's going on?
Gentlemen, it's so good to be here. Thanks so much. Another Thursday, and it's June.
It is June. That is true. Dave Schofield, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going all right. I was able to last night secure an item to use for our Survivor football this coming fall. So it's on its way here. I'm excited to be able to announce that later this summer.
Deontay Johnson.
Oh, I already have that. We're using that one.
They have not announced dates yet for camp, have they? I don't think so. I haven't seen.
They have not, and people keep asking Bob Labriola on the asked and answered column he does, and he keeps saying around July 4th.
Oh,
I think that seems kind of late.
That's what I thought too.
He would know better than almost anybody else, unless he's just. Well, let's just say this. He would have easier access to find that out than anyone else. I don't know that he actually took the time to do it, or if he's just, shooting from the hip from just himself.
Yeah, grumpy old man Labriola sometimes is what he does. Nonetheless, okay, let's get right to it. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers news this week. And they wrapped up Phase 3, OTAs Week 3. And let's say what you want about what happens with football in shorts, but the big news was the Steelers made a signing, and that signing was one Cameron Sutton. Now, I'm going to preview, say, my Let's Ride podcast tomorrow, Friday morning. I do an entire segment on this topic and whether it was the right move. But I wanted to give you all the platform to let you kind of sound off about what you think, because when you make a signing like this, you can't not bring in the morality of the situation. Yes, you can talk about on-field presence and what he does to the defense, but at the same time, you can't ignore everything else. So, Bryan, we'll go with you first. What were your thoughts on the Cam Sutton signing?
I do love the signing for football reasons and for, I don't want to use the word rehabilitation, but reasons, but to build Cameron Sutton and get him back up. This is a great place for him to be because it's like coming home. He's in a safe environment. I don't think the Steelers, I have a feeling the Steelers took some time to go a little bit deeper and see everything that's going on and realize that it was safe to bring him back, because if it was a position where they didn't like what they looked at, well, I don't think they would have done it. They've been smart in recent years when it comes to stuff like that. So I'm going to say it works in so many ways. And if you just go 1 year ago, go back to March of last year, people were lamenting the loss of Cameron Sutton to the team going to the Detroit Lions. So I kind of feel that it works.
So I got to be honest, before I throw it to Dave, I'm surprised you said that, Bryan. I really am, because you've been very adamant with other players in the NFL who have had similar transgressions off the field, and in your disdain for them. I'm surprised that you're not a little bit more upset about that side of things.
Yeah, you know what? You could definitely you could bring up things that I've said in the past, and that's no problem. I just kind of believe that this team is going to look at the situation and feel like the fact that charges were dropped, I believe,
Reduced,
yeah.
And that I think that they investigated well, because what I've seen of certain teams the last few years, they do investigate these situations real well. This wasn't a knee-jerk thing. He's been available for a good month now.
All right. Dave Schofield, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. It's from a football standpoint, you've got to like what the Steelers are doing then. That they have that option, specifically if you're looking at a slot cornerback. Cam Sutton did struggle last year in Detroit, but he was basically their number one guy, and he was constantly on the outside, and that's what he was asked to do. And I think that is why the Steelers weren't going to pay him that kind of money like they did in Detroit because they didn't think he was that guy, although he was a guy that fits an important role. I think from a football standpoint, it's a good signing, although you don't know how much football he's going to miss because I'm assuming there will be a suspension. My thing is that the Steelers, it's different if you're going to stick with a guy who's going through something because you have him under contract versus signing someone who's going through this. They wouldn't have had to have signed him at all. And they would have been, and there you didn't have to deal with the repercussions of what happened. So to me, the fact that, it's not like teams were beating down his door ready to sign him. He signed reportedly for the league minimum. So that tells you that they were not bidding against anyone else. He's probably just like, please give me a chance to get back in the NFL and show what I can do. But they had to be looking into these things. We don't know a lot of stuff. I don't want to go into what supposedly happened because the last thing I want to do is put anything that's not the correct information out there. So I do know that it was felony charges and they were reduced to misdemeanor. You can find what the accusations are with Ever if you want to go look for those. I don't want to mess that up. I just have to assume that the Steelers dug into this deeply and were okay with taking another shot on Cam Sutton based on everything. That's all I can assume. But we'll just have to see how that side of everything plays out. But like I say, from a football standpoint, their defensive backs room, especially their cornerback room, which I did an article about today, how there is not one single player in the cornerback room that was there when Cam Sutton was here, and he was only away for one season, that's still there. That's how much of an overhaul it's had. But I would say that the room is better with him there as long as this other stuff doesn't bring him down.
So I do think there's going to be a suspension. How many games, I think, is what we debate here. Because even if, the court of law deems him to be completely innocent and he walks away, that doesn't mean the NFL can't say, yeah, we still are going to suspend you for that. I mean, there's a million examples of that already. But I want to ask you all something. So I did a podcast with our buddy Wesley Coleman of the Dome Patrol, and it's going to air on our FFS and NFL feed tomorrow. And it's all about morality in the NFL and how should it play a role, because it's difficult. It's a fine line to walk. Football teams need to win football games. And sometimes players that do not so good stuff off the field, how does that play a role? He brought up a great point. I want to ask you all this. Why do you think the Steelers made the signing now? In other words, Dave, you said it, and I agree with you. I don't think there were a lot of suitors for Cam Sutton right now. So why did the Steelers say third week, phase 3 of OTAs, let's bring him in now and not, okay, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait till mini camp's done. We'll make the signing closer to training camp, and then you'll get in there and do that. Bryan, what's your take on that? Why do you think they did it now?
Because they know him. Because they are comfortable enough with bringing him in for some reason, for whatever that reason might be, and they feel that they had a deficiency at slot corner. If any team is equipped to take the gamble on a guy who is a guy that's formerly from their team. Just now, if this was a situation where if he played for the Washington Commanders for 6 years, left and went to the Detroit Lions, Washington could probably feel more comfortable if they had the same coaches in place and all of that to go ahead and bring him back because they know who he is. Mike Tomlin knows who he is. Definitely Terrell Austin knows who he is. So I kind of feel that they didn't really want to lose him in the first place. They knew that they couldn't pay him a year ago. But now we haven't seen financials, but I have a feeling he comes in pretty cheap, and it's easy for both sides to go into a situation where there's familiarity.
Dave, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, to me, the familiarity thing would be an even bigger reason to not sign him yet, to wait until, and my goodness, you would have almost 2 more months until training camp that you could have waited and gotten more information. So to me, I believe they either one, have the information, or two, think that, or well, no, I think they do have the information, or two, that information leads them to believe that he'll be back and they wouldn't get him as cheaply later. To me, it's either, there's several scenarios. There's what I just said. There's the whole idea of, hey, this is a whole new cornerback room, and we would like to get him acclimated with those other guys now. Or there is also the possibility of exactly what Afton Ford said in the live chat. They did it to let the press coverage pass now rather than at training camp. This will happen now, and then you'll have 6 weeks of nothing. And then it's not Cam Sutton's back at training camp when everybody's looking at the NFL even more than they are now. I don't know, everybody. Some people don't. Some people start looking at training camp. Some people start looking at preseason. Some people start looking at the regular season. Not everybody's looking at during OTAs. It could be from a PR attitude about it. That's the thing. I felt that because he was familiar with them, if there was any doubt of things going forward, that they should have just waited. They didn't. So there had to be a reason that they were good with it now.
Go ahead, Bryan.
So another thing that I think that, Dave, I agree with a lot of what you said, but there's another reason that you don't wait is because when we go through that first week of training camp, like last year, the Miami Dolphins lost their stud, Jalen Ramsey. They lost him. And so when that happens, then Cam Sutton might be on the top of the list to call. Stephon Gilmore might be on the top of the list. All that stuff might be all those guys might be on the top of the list, but it's going to be a very short list. And it would be easier to bring in for any team to bring him in. And then you're not really getting him in on the cheap because they might throw a few more dollars at him. So I think with the injuries, it's a good situation to start now.
Well, yeah, but you could make the signing July 20th, and it would be before anyone's getting hurt in training camp because it hasn't started. And that gives you another month and a half if you needed to get more information about the situation of what went on. That I'm not saying waiting until after training camp's going. I would say you could have waited till it was much closer and not had it. And, he just missed out on OTAs and mandatory minicamp if they felt they needed to wait. So obviously they have to feel confident that they're aware of everything with this situation.
It's interesting. I do agree with you guys that on the field, if we're just talking about football, this is a great move. Just talking about football, leaving the off the field issues and all the stuff that's happening. And I know that's difficult to do for a lot of people, but if we can compartmentalize this, Cam Sutton coming back and his versatility, it really does make a big question or answer a big question, I should say. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. So, Bryan, any final thoughts on Cam Sutton?
No, I love the pick. Excuse me, not the pick. I love the signing. I kind of feel that it works. Yeah, there's a part of me that I would have loved it if it was just a situation where he was cut for different reasons and there wasn't this cloud over Cam Sutton. But I still go back to my original thought that they did do due diligence.
Okay, Dave, any final thoughts?
Yeah, it had to be that they did due diligence. And I love the whole idea of that we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. That's the way it's supposed to work, but that's not the way it works in the court of public opinion. So it's one of those things where I'm just really torn because, it would be terrible if information was out there that wasn't accurate and it wasn't exactly how things were said. But at the same time, if it was as bad as the initial report was, that's not a good thing either. So that's why, like with so many things we have to do as Steelers fans, we need to trust the Steelers to know more about the situation than what we do.
Fair enough. Well said. All right. We spent a lot more time on this than I thought we would, but I shouldn't have assumed that we wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. So we're going to take an early break. And when we come back, we're going to talk all about the Steelers' 6th round picks, our final preview of the Steelers draft class. And then we'll also do some trivia, some other fun stuff. If you're listening on YouTube, Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it today, we're not going anywhere. For those on the audio side, we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. All right, Steeler fans, we are back. I thank you all for being patient with us as we get to the topic of today's podcast, which is the 6th-round draft picks. We have gone through all of the draft picks so far. So if you want to go back, we've gone week by week. There's only one break, and that was when the schedule was released. We took a break from the previewing the draft picks to do the schedule release podcast. So you can go back and check out all the Steelers previews and hear our thoughts on Troy Falatanu, Zach Frazier, the 2 Wilsons in the 3rd round, Mason McCormick last week. And now we talk about 6th-round draft picks, Logan Lee and Ryan Watts. So in this case, we have officially gone into the realm that Jeff knows nothing about these people when they're drafted. I mean, nothing. Maybe there's a 4th-round pick. I'm like, I've heard of that name before. 6th-round guys, I don't know jack squat about these guys when they're drafted. But then you do a little homework. Logan Lee, let's talk about him first, a defensive lineman out of Iowa. Not your typical build for what the Steelers like on the defensive front, but I think we overlook that because why? He grew up a Steelers fan. So kudos to Logan Lee for that. Bryan, when you saw Logan Lee was the draft pick in the 6th round, what was your thought?
I knew nothing about him either. I'm not going to pretend that I just found out that he played a lot of games. He started 41 of the 43 games he played at Iowa, and he already looks good in black and gold. But I can't tell you enough about him. One thing that stood out on draft day, and this stood out about Mason McCormick as well, was that Logan Lee has a mean streak. And I love the idea of a guy with a mean streak. It looks like he does have the potential to have some speed as a defensive end as well. I'm just going to finish off with a joke here. And I'm just going to mention that I kind of feel like not the late Stan Lee made these picks, not because the guy's name is Logan Lee, but because of alliteration. If you go back to Spider-Man and all of those Marvel stuff, everybody had the same first and the same letter for the first and last name. He loved alliteration, and the Steelers twice in a row, Mason McCormick, Logan Lee. I was waiting for, William Watts instead of Ryan Watts. I mean, and there's a very funny Big Bang Theory when Raj is making fun of that and Stan Lee refuses to buy him gelato or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Dave, what was your take when Logan Lee was drafted?
You're exactly right, Jeff. When we get past day 2, when they get into day 3, guys, you're like, am I going to know any of these? That's why last year it was such a pleasure to have Nick Herbig, who we had heard of and and actually knew when he got there. I mean, I'll be honest with you, Mason McCormick, because he was FCS, and I didn't expect the Steelers to draft a guard, knew nothing. Same with these guys. I know that the Steelers, they were at Iowa's pro day, weren't they? Because everyone thought that they were all into Cooper DeJean, right? DeJean, not DeJean. I think it's the right way to say it.
Yeah.
And maybe that wasn't the case. That maybe the Steelers were just looking at some other things. And I had to instantly do research in order to do the Breaking News podcast, finding out things like he was the only married player on the team last year for Iowa and things of that nature, but didn't know anything about him. Just, it sounds like a good thing to do with 6th and 7th round picks when there's someone that you think that, hey, they might be in this spot because they don't exactly fit this mold versus that mold versus one of those things. And that's a good time to take these guys. And if they work out, great. And if they don't, you're out a 6th round pick. So that's kind of how my thoughts were on both of their 6th round picks. And I think Logan Lee, Jeff, you mentioned before, if he makes the 53-man roster, he could be the guy on the inactive list every week.
Well, that's always when you get into the 6th round, in my opinion, you have to ask the question, do you think they're going to make the team? Yeah. I think everyone else that we've discussed, 4th round and up, it's typically they're going to make the team, but maybe they'll be inactive. These guys there's no guarantee. Bryan, do you think Logan Lee makes this roster?
I think he's a practice squad guy with a possibility of unless he really shows off at camp, in camp, and in preseason games. But I don't think they part ways with him. I think he is in the locker room, but he's on the practice squad, and with the potential you might see a guy like this in December, something like that. I'm still in favor of. I learned during this draft, and I made it as an offhanded comment and a joke, but I would like to see the Steelers trade every 6th and 7th round pick from now on. It would make things better, and and like Dave always says, especially in the 7th round, which they didn't have, they're glorified. They're undrafted free agents, and so this must be a guy that they felt that they wanted to sign in some way, and said, well, we'll just go ahead and protect them and bring them in. But we've seen 6th rounders. My gosh, remember the year that Greg Lloyd was a 6th rounder? Remember the year that Antonio Brown was a 6th rounder? So there's always opportunities for those guys. I know a 7th rounder that was named Brett Kiesel. So these guys will have a chance to show off and show out.
Dave, what's your take on him making the 53-man roster?
Yeah, it's a 6th round pick, so he's got to actually show that he deserves a spot. So if they keep 7 defensive linemen, which is something they've been doing lately, I don't think they'll go to 8 unless you're dealing. Well, they don't even have to do a thing anymore where because you can have 2 players that you can designate to return, and they don't have to be on the 53-man roster for a day. That was a new rule that was changed this offseason. So it's not even like, oh, they got to keep an 8th one in order to move someone to IR so they can return. You're not even looking at that. It would be tough for them to keep that many. So he's got to show that he deserves to be that number 7. But I'll also tell you this. Let's say if it's down to someone between like him and a Braden Fajoko, I think he would get the advantage of getting the last spot on the roster in order to protect him for a year of having him inactive. I mean, he could even be a guy that could be the 7th guy on the defensive line. And if somebody's hurt, they elevate someone from the practice squad and play above him. But so much so if they want to keep him around for another year, that could be a possibility. And I'm trying to judge this. And I haven't even seen the dude play because we're not really seeing him at OTAs. Who knows? Maybe he's great and gets in the mix this year. That would be a really great surprise. But to me, if he makes the roster and is inactive every game, that's fine. That tells me that the Steelers think that they could keep working with him and get him to be somewhere more for next year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he does in competition. Really, who's he going against? He's going against DeMarvin Leal, Isaiah Loudermilk. Maybe if you want to view it as Montravius Adams, but I think Montravius Adams is more of a nose tackle. It's not out of the realm of possibility. DeMarvin Leal seems like a tweener, and they weren't too high on him last year. Obviously, we dubbed him Mr. Inactive at the end of last season, so we'll see. But let's go to the other 6th-round draft pick, Ryan Watts. I'm going to label him as a defensive back because even though he was a cornerback at Texas, transitioning to the NFL, most are labeling him as a special teams guy and then a safety depth piece, if you will. Bryan, what's your take on Ryan Watts?
It reminded me of 1996 when Earl Holmes congratulated Bill Cowher, said, hey, congratulations, you got the best linebacker in the draft in the 4th round. When Ryan Watts talked to Mike Tomlin on the phone, his exact words are like, I'm ready to go now, coach. You've got a pissed off player. And so he feels like he was slighted. He feels like he's got a giant chip on his shoulder, and we have no problem with black and gold chips on shoulders. We saw a guy, Trey Norwood, be a 7th round pick, that come in and play on opening day. So this is a guy that I think he has more of an opportunity to be playing and making the roster. He'll have to make hay on special teams. And it seems like he definitely has the speed for that. He has, my gosh, he played in championship games in 2020 for the Ohio State Buckeyes before transferring. He has he's played in the Sugar Bowl. He's been around a while. He's had an opportunity to play at Texas as well. He obviously has the opinion that he is better than everybody else thought, that because he lasted to the 6th round. Good, show us. But that's a situation at safety, especially if they play him at safety. And with his size, he looks like he'd be better off as a safety for the Steelers. Then that's not the strongest group right now. In fact, I would actually think that safety, I mean, I still don't know enough about Deshaun Elliott, so that's why I'm saying this. But when I look at the whole safety room, I know DeMonte KZ's there. Of course, Minka's great. But I think he has a chance to find his way into playing on Sundays.
Okay. Dave, what's your thought on Watts?
Yeah, what's interesting there is the reason I have him pegged more as a safety is because he's more of a zone guy than a man guy. And I think the Steelers are wanting to do more man-to-man with their corners. So that's just why I kind of put him more in that position group. Man, longest arms of any defensive back in last year's draft. I didn't look beyond, not in the draft, from last year's combine. There could have been a player that was drafted that wasn't at the combine. But 34.5-inch arms, that goes to show that the Steelers are looking for long arm defensive backs. To me, he's got to make the team by showing that he could be adequate depth. He's got to get a helmet by being Danny Smith's guy. So that's his path to this roster. He's got to show that in a pinch, if there was a bunch of guys go down, that he could step in and fill in or play a few snaps here and there in a game adequately. That gets him a spot on the 53. And then if he is a guy so many people are always like, hey, Steelers lost both their gunners from last year. That looks like this is a guy that could be a gunner. Yeah, then that gives him a helmet. But he's got to show that he's adequate depth. That's what ended up happening with James Pierre. As time went on, him being an option at cornerback was worse. He was a worse option and a worse option and a worse option. Not because I think he got worse, it's because I think the Steelers, especially last year, were transitioning to get better. And therefore, if you can't justify keeping him for the depth of that position, because he ain't no Miles Killebrew. Miles Killebrew is already on this team. So he's the guy that's got the special team spot, and they'll use it for that. So anyone else is really going to have to make sure they can prove their worth in their position group. But I do think for him getting a helmet on game day, the key is special teams.
Yeah, if I was the coach, whether it's Mike Tomlin, position coach, doesn't matter, Terrell Austin, I'd say, listen, young man, welcome to the Steelers. See that guy chewing the bubble gum over there? His name's Danny Smith. He's a special teams coordinator. You Velcro yourself to him from now until the end of training camp. The way you're going to make this team is by special teams. Yeah. Yes, you'll still go to the meetings for the defensive backs and the defense, and you'll learn the positions, and you'll go through the motions. But if you think you're making the 53, it's not going to be backing up Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's going to be by being a gunner on these new kickoffs and the punt team and trying to find your niche there. That's how you make this team. And so we'll see if the kid can do it. If I had to put money down on a guy that doesn't make the team that was drafted, it's probably Ryan Watts. Not because he was the last pick, but when you look at all the other depth that they have, it just doesn't fit as terms of a number scheme. Dave, you want to add anything?
Well, I'm just going to say, I almost said this at the end with Logan Lee, is we don't know exactly what the Steelers are going to be looking for on that kickoff team now that's different. That, maybe a defense, think of Brett Kiesel running down the field. Right? Isn't that, you don't need Orpheus Roy, the wedge buster anymore, because you're not allowed to do those kind of things.
It's funny,
but maybe someone like that.
Yeah.
It could get him a helmet on game day just specifically for that play.
Right. NFL on the NFL whip around that I do with Coach KT Smith on our NFL feed. I asked him, look, Coach, if you're picking the style of player you want on these new kickoffs, do you have a mixture? Do you have some big guys that are going to go down? He said, no. He said, in my opinion, it is speed, speed, speed. Give me the fastest guys you can get. He said, that's why Peyton Wilson for the Steelers should be your number one kickoff guy, because he's big and the guy moves like a damn deer. So that's what he was saying. Now, every coach is going to be different, but in terms of like how they can't move until the ball is touched by the return man, you want someone with that quick sudden burst that can get up the field, bust a gap, or help penetrate the line that's in front of them. That play is going to be really interesting. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing it.
Can I bring up something?
Sure.
Because where AFL 67 said, my question with new kickoff 10 yards apart, do you really need gunners anymore? I'm going to say absolutely.
10 of them.
You didn't, what's that? No.
You need 10 gunners.
10 of them. But I'm saying, yeah, because my question is, how much did you need gunners on kickoffs before? Because it was just touchbacks.
That's true.
And what you really need your gunners for is punt coverage. That's what gunners are really about, is your punt coverage. Because they're the guys that aren't blocking to make sure that the punt doesn't get blocked. They're the guys that are getting downfield as soon as it's snapped. So they're going to be just as important, and gunners are way more important to the punt than they have been to the kickoffs in recent years. But now I think saying you need 10 of them is a good way to put it.
Brian, what's your take on Ryan Watts? Any final thoughts there?
Boys, I learned something here today, especially right there from Dave. So great. Thank you. One last thing on Ryan Watts. There's something special to me about a guy that's an academic All-American. And that means to me that they're going to be better studying the game. And if they have if he has a work ethic along with it, and you have an academic All-American, then that kind of helps. We saw a quarterback with no skills whatsoever. I don't want to say no skills whatsoever, but a guy in Mr. Fitzpatrick that lasted a long time in this league because he was intelligent. And I think intelligence helps in all phases of the NFL.
I'm looking up what Ryan Watts' major was because I'm always curious.
I didn't know he was an academic All-American.
I hear
thank you
academic
very much, bad.
Academic All-American in general studies. No, I'm just
no
pre-communications major, whatever that is. What is a pre-communications major?
I was a communications major.
So... He was a pre-communications major. So that's I don't know. I've never seen whatever. That's fine. I'm just always curious about it.
Well,
smoke signals? I don't know.
You guys bring up you bring up the Big Bang Theory. It always reminds me of Fun with Flags.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe that's
what is a pre-communication?
Vexillology.
Hey, the most impressive college resume was, remember Sean Davis? He knew like 3 or 4 languages coming out of Maryland. It was ridiculous, that guy. When they talked about his academic stature, it was insane.
Yeah, and we always talk about Josh Dobbs too.
Yeah,
and I think that's
aeronautics. What's that?
Yeah, but I think that's pre-verbal communication skills are all the ways a child communicates with others without using words. I don't know if that's the right thing.
No, I don't think it's pre.
Well, here we go.
Talking about what you do before you communicate. I think it's like pre-med. You're not talking about what happened before medicine. You're talking about you're in a program that's getting you into a medical program. So pre-communications, I assume that means it's the program leading into a communications major.
I'm not trying to cheapen his Ryan Watts' academic achievement at all. I just was always curious because I just always remember like Tony Siragusa at Pitt. And I'm like, what did he major in? Drinking? I mean, some of these guys don't graduate. I mean, hell, Jerome Bettis had to go back to Notre Dame and finish his degree. I think Ryan Shazier went back to Ohio State and finished his degree. So, yeah, I mean, he still had to take the classes. He still had to get good grades. So good for Ryan Watts. And I didn't know that.
Introductory communications is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
According to the UNC Charlotte, where the Steelers have a few UNC Charlotte guys.
Who was the name of the guy that was the Rhodes Scholar out of Florida State?
Oh,
he ended up in Steelers training camp
Roll.
one year, but Roll.
Myron Roll.
Yes, because he's one I remember because I was watching because he to interview for the Rhodes Scholar, he was late to the game where they were playing Maryland, and he had to have a special car drive him in like right before right after kickoff happened. Anyway, sorry. Just talking
That's
about
okay.
smart football players. Just thought I'd put that out. But he's like a doctor. I don't know.
He's not in the league. I know that.
Yep.
So, all right. Dave has trivia. Bryan does not, unless Bryan thought of one.
Nope.
I've
right.
got good. I've got double trivia.
All right, double trivia. Here
okay,
we go.
because I started doing one thing and it led me down the rabbit hole to another. Okay. We're talking about because in looking to look up something, I found something else. Okay. Looking at Logan Lee, defensive line. Okay. How many times we'll cut it off at the merger. Okay. I went as far back as the merger, all the way to 1970. How many drafts in those 55 drafts did the Steelers have a year where they did not draft a defensive lineman?
Oh, goodness.
Out of 55 that they didn't, I'm going to say
they did not.
12.
I'm actually going to go 8.
And the answer is if you subtract your two answers. 4.
That's it.
When I went back to look at now, some of these I had to look at where they were listed defensive end. I had to try to, and some of them were guys that they drafted didn't end up playing. So I had to go and search and see if they were actually a lineman or a linebacker versus when they said defensive end. No, 4 years that they did not draft a defensive lineman. When was the last year they didn't do it?
They had Leal. Oh my goodness.
I'm just going to pull a rabbit out of hat. 2006.
I'm going to go 2004.
Actually, much more recent. It's 2017. The TJ Watt draft. They did not take a defensive lineman. But the 4 years that I have now, if someone could prove another year that I missed something in there, that I would love to be corrected on this. But this is from everything that I did. I didn't filter it. I went through and looked through every position of every draft pick from now back to 1970.
There were some 17-round drafts back then.
Well, when you got to them, those were easier. I'm like, oh, just find one. You don't have to dig much because you expected them because there were so many rounds. But the years were 2017, 2008, 2003, and 1991. So when I started looking at that, then I started looking at some of these drafts and I had a draft that jumped out to me like, wow, that was a pretty good draft. And oh, that was a pretty good draft. And oh, man, that was a terrible draft. And I started looking at stuff. That doesn't mean that it had to happen with the Steelers, but which Steelers draft produced the most NFL players to make a Pro Bowl? Not the most total Pro Bowls, the most total players. They didn't have to make the Pro Bowl with the Steelers. Just had to make it some point in their career. But what draft had the most Pro Bowl players that the Steelers selected?
1989.
Okay, Brian's going with 1989.
No, I'm sorry. I meant 87. Excuse me.
You went 87. Okay.
I'll go with 89 then.
No, 89 is not one. I'm just going to find 89. I think Bryan meant 87 when he said 89 because 89 only had 2. 87 had 4 Pro Bowlers. That is one of 4 years where they had 4 Pro Bowlers. Because those 4 Pro Bowl. Bryan, do you know who they were in 87?
Yeah, we would go Rod Woodson.
Yep.
Greg Lloyd.
Yep. And the other 2 were not with the Steelers when they made the Pro Bowl.
Thomas Everett. And I don't have the 4.
Oh, the other one, 5-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro in Tampa Bay. Hardy Nickerson.
Yeah, Hardy. Okay.
Yeah, you forget about him because so much of his career was after Pittsburgh. But that was one of 4 years where they had 4. There's one draft in there where they had 5 Pro Bowlers.
(2010)
Nope.
How many were in 2017?
3.
3.
I think it was 3. I'm double checking. Yeah, because they didn't end up with 4. But yeah, because you got TJ, Juju, and then Connor, who was later.
Yeah.
It can't be 1974.
1974 was another year that had 4.
Yeah.
Because the 4 Hall of Fame players, because you can't count Donnie Shelby, wasn't drafted.
Can't.
The four Hall of Fame players, the only players in that draft that ever made a Pro Bowl. But there's one other draft where they had 5.
Could you give me the decade?
You were in the decade with your last guess.
The 70s?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go. I would have to say 71 with Jack Ham and Mel Blount and
No, Mel Blount wasn't in 71. He was in 70.
70.
But 71 is the answer.
Okay.
1971 is the answer. 5. Frank Lewis, who
Yeah.
that one didn't happen with the Steelers, but he was their
Bills.
first pick. Okay. Jack Ham, Dwight White,
Yeah.
Larry Brown, and Mike Wagner, all in the same draft. And that doesn't even include Moon Mullins, because he never made a Pro Bowl. But he was
And
in that draft as
Mike
well.
Wagner was like a 16th round pick or something like that.
I
I mean, he was late.
yeah, it was 11th. Yeah.
11th. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Andy Russell. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's a really good draft when you look at that they had those players, and you had Moon Mullins, who didn't make a Pro Bowl but was a good player. So yeah, that got me diving a little bit more. This isn't trivia. This is just more of a fun fact. Okay. Here's your fun fact. The Steelers had in 1974, they had 4 Pro Bowlers. In 1987, they had 4 Pro Bowlers. The other 2 years where they had 4 Pro Bowlers was 1950 and 1992. Over the other 2 years where they had 4 players that made 4. But if you look from that 74 to 87, that 74 draft, when you add up the number of Pro Bowls, it was 24 Pro Bowls between those 4 guys. Then in 87, there was 22 Pro Bowls between those 4 guys. Now, only 12 of them were with Pittsburgh and 10 of them when they were with other teams, because of that's just how it was then. But you know how many total Pro Bowlers, or it's not Pro Bowlers, but how many total Pro Bowls there were from 1975 through 1986, the years between those 2 drafts? It was a total of 14. Okay. And only 9 of them were with the Steelers. The Steelers only had, in every single one of those years in between, at most, they had 1 Pro Bowler in a draft. A lot of times they only made it 1 time. For example, like in 75, 1 Pro Bowl, and that was their first round draft pick. And it wasn't
Brown.
It was Brown. It was in Seattle. Okay, 77, 1 Pro Bowl with Robin Cole. 80, 1 Pro Bowl,
Tunch.
1 Pro Bowler, Tunch Ilkin 2 times. 81, 1 Pro Bowler, 1 time, David Little. 82, 1 Pro Bowler, 3 times, Mike Merriweather. No, Bryan, you don't need to tell your Mike Merriweather story. 84, 1 Pro Bowler, 2 times, Lewis Lips. And in 86, 1 Pro Bowler, 4 times in, who was that? They were all, that was Brent Jones, all in San Francisco, none with Pittsburgh. That was a huge gap in there of not really getting any top-end talent or much top-end talent for the Steelers. So you want to know why the Steelers had such a tough time through the 80s? It started with the 75 draft and it rolled for 12 years.
Jeez. That's good stuff. Is that it, Dave? That's your trivia?
Yeah, I thought that was a lot. I thought that was too much.
No, it is. I just want to. You had said there are so many. You had a bunch of questions. I just want to make sure you were done.
Yeah, I didn't make you guys answer the questions about that last bit just because I wanted to help you get through it. So,
Jeff
and but also like
thumbs
Brown
up.
said, they picked last because they were winning Super Bowls.
Yeah.
Remember, there was no free agency.
True.
So they crushed so many. I mean, top end players in so many of those drafts, then great drafts like 71 and 74. No wonder you were doing so well. And then you hit a dry spell. So
Yeah. All right. This has been a good show. We're trying to keep these a little bit shorter. So, Bryan, do you have final thoughts?
So we're going into June. I expected there to be some kind of signing that a little bit more high profile. Now I'm starting to think that it's not going to happen. I'm starting to think that the wide receiver room is where it's going to be, and that's okay. And the reason I'm saying it's okay is because this is a deep team, and they're building their team the way that they the way that they feel that they need to build it. And I think the wide receiver room is by strategy at this point. But there was a question Tom Riley put out there earlier on the show asking the three of us if we've ever seen what other teams can we remember that had a draft, not a draft, that had a depth chart that was this deep. And I can't remember one. I'm not going to pretend to, even those 70s teams, I'm not going to pretend to say that I could really think of another one, because a lot of those teams, even the ones that won Super Bowls in the 2000s, if you had an injury, and one of the reasons they did so well is because they stayed healthy, but if you had an injury, you were done. It almost feels like with this Steeler team going into training camp that you don't want to wish for an injury, but you kind of feel like you can sustain one because they're more commonplace.
All right. Final thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, just to piggyback off what Bryan said there, you're going to have superstars that are irreplaceable because that's just how it is. But then you also have one thing that Omar Khan has wanted to bring in. He constantly talks about competition. Not only does competition make your players, your starters better, whoever wins that job, it also makes your depth better as well. So that's something to remember. And exactly how deep is this team? We'll see. Hey, this morning on Stat Geek, if you didn't check it out, I was breaking down the possibility of expanded usage and numbers coming out for the tight end position this year. And then, of course, I'm talking about that of how in Arthur Smith offenses, not just because he had Kyle Pitts, even in Tennessee, they had tight ends that did not line up very often in line as an inline tight end. So maybe that's something we're going to see. I heard when you hear reports about Pat Freiermuth being in the slot a little bit more. Sounds like some good stuff. Maybe we'll see some good usage of everything there. All I know is, hey, it's June. We've got OTAs. Our phase 3 of OTAs is officially done now. We've got mandatory minicamp. Let's enjoy it. Let's hit that lull. Let's get to training camp eventually. But really like the potential of things to come with this team. And as Bryan said, maybe there's not that big signing. Maybe there's just continuing to build and put pieces. So I'm ready to go. I'm excited for week 1. I don't want to wish away my summer that just got started, but man, bring on as much Steelers content as I can get.
I remind everyone to check out my Let's Ride podcast tomorrow on Friday morning, as well as all of our content on the audio only side. You're not going to see those on YouTube. Anywhere where you get your podcasts or Steelers or Steel Curtain Network, you'll find us. Please follow and subscribe so you don't miss any of our shows. And as always, steelcurtainnetwork.com. That should be one of your stops. We're hoping we put out some good content, steelcurtainnetwork.com. A lot of us that are on the podcast platform are also writers there, so you can see our written content there. But that does it for another Steelers preview. Dave, why don't you send us out like you always do?
Hey.
We'll see you next week for another preview. Take it easy.